The phone on my desk buzzed, a single sharp vibration that cut through the 3:17 a.m. silence. I didn't need to look at the screen. I knew who it was. I let it go to voicemail, my eyes still fixed on the cascading lines of code I was refining. A moment later, the notification lit up. I tapped the speaker icon, keeping the volume low. Serafina's voice filled the quiet office, not a live call, but a recording. A message delivered from a safe distance. Her tone was bright, breezy, the one she used with investors and magazine editors. "Hey Rory, just leaving a quick one," she began, the diminutive nickname a familiar, tiny prick of condescension. "Just a heads up, I've had IT consolidate all the top-level admin privileges under my office. New security protocol. It'll free you up from all that boring oversight stuff so you can get back to what you're good at, just coding. Chat soon, bye." The message ended. Silence returned, heavier than before. Just coding, as if I were some fresh-faced intern and not the architect of the entire digital universe that paid for her designer suits and corner office. The words weren't a shock. They were a signal, the starting gun. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding, my fingers slowly uncurling from the fist they had formed on my desk. My heart wasn't racing. It was cold, steady, pumping ice through my veins. This was the final arrogant move I had been waiting for. My hands moved with practiced calm over the keyboard, opening a terminal window. I typed a command string, a backdoor I'd built into the system years ago as a failsafe. I hit enter. The screen flashed a single brutal line in red text, "Access denied." She hadn't just used the front door, she'd brought in a locksmith. She thought she had sealed me out of my own kingdom. A slow smile, one that felt foreign on my own face, touched my lips. I pulled my phone toward me again. This time I opened an encrypted messaging app. My text to Leo, my head of engineering, was short. "It's done." The reply came back almost instantly, a beacon of loyalty in the quiet dark. "Been waiting for this signal for a month." I set the phone down and swiveled my chair to face the floor-to-ceiling window. The city lights blurred as my mind drifted back 3 months to a gray, cold afternoon, heavy with the scent of lilies and loss. It was the day of my mother's funeral, the day the last ounce of warmth and trust I had for my own flesh and blood turned to ash. Serafina had used my grief as a tool, my sorrow as a signature line, counting on me to be too broken to see the knife she held behind her back. She had counted wrong. The woman who signed that document in a fog of sorrow was gone. In her place sat someone else entirely, a woman who had spent every waking moment since that day, building a fortress of code around her legacy, waiting patiently for this exact moment. The night was just beginning. The city lights outside my window dissolved, melting into the gray, sterile light of the funeral home reception room. 3 months ago, it felt like another lifetime, another person's memory. The air, thick with the cloying, funereal scent of lilies, was a physical weight on my shoulders. I stood alone near a wall of frosted glass, the cheap, lukewarm coffee in a styrofoam cup growing cold in my hands. My own heart felt like a hollow, frozen cavity in my chest, a place where warmth used to be. Every sound was muted, distant, the hushed murmurs of distant relatives, the soft rustle of dark suits, as if I were watching the world from under deep water. Then Serafina appeared. I watched her from across the room, a predator in her natural habitat. Even in mourning, she was immaculate. A tailored black dress that cost more than my first car, a single strand of pearls at her throat, her dark hair swept into a flawless chignon. She wasn't grieving, she was networking. I saw her intercept our cousin, Martha, who was dabbing her eyes with a tissue. Martha had started to share a memory, her voice thick with emotion. "I remember when your mother and I—" But Serafina cut her off with a gentle but firm hand on her arm. "We'll have plenty of time for stories later, Martha. Thank you for coming." It was a dismissal, polished to a high shine. Then her eyes found me, and she began her purposeful stride across the polished floor, her heels making soft, determined clicks. She didn't hug me, she didn't touch my arm, she didn't even say she was sorry for my loss, for our loss. "Aurora," she said, her voice a low, urgent whisper that cut through my fog. She was holding a sleek leather portfolio. "I need you to sign something." I just stared at her, uncomprehending. The words were a foreign language, nonsensical in the context of the room, the day, the suffocating scent of the lilies. "What?" My own voice sounded distant, cracked. "Just some company papers," she said, flipping the portfolio open on a nearby table. The crisp sound of the latch was an obscenity in the hushed room. She pulled out a thick sheaf of documents and a heavy, expensive-looking fountain pen. "Some standard updates. With Mom gone, we need to make sure everything is in order, to keep things stable for the investors." Her eyes were fixed on mine, intense, willing me to comply. I felt a small, weak flicker of resistance, a voice in the back of my numb mind screaming that this isn't right. But I was so tired, the kind of soul-deep exhaustion that grief brings, a weariness that makes every thought an effort, every decision a mountain to climb. Serafina saw the surrender in my eyes. She moved in for the final push, her voice softening with a chillingly perfect imitation of shared grief. "Mom would have wanted us to take care of this quickly," she murmured, placing the cold, heavy pen in my hand. "She always said to protect the company. It was her legacy, our legacy. It was a perversion of everything Mom taught us. Look after your sister," she'd always said. "You two are all you have." Serafina was using that legacy as a weapon against me. I looked down at the documents, the dense blocks of legal text blurred into meaningless shapes. My eyes snagged on our mother's full legal name at the top of a page, and a fresh wave of pain washed over me. Serafina pointed a perfectly manicured finger at the first yellow flag. "Just here." In the far corner of the ceiling, I vaguely registered the small, dark dome of a security camera. A silent, unblinking eye watching the transaction. It meant nothing to me then. My hand trembled as I signed my name. The scratch of the pen nib on the thick, expensive paper was the only sharp sound in my muffled world. My signature, usually so firm, was a jagged, broken scrawl. With each stroke, I felt like I was giving away another piece of myself, but I was too lost in the abyss to understand what was actually being taken. When I was done, Serafina efficiently gathered the pages, her movements crisp and satisfied. She tucked them back into the portfolio and snapped it shut. The sound was like a cell door locking. "Good," she said, her businesslike tone returning instantly. "Now that's handled." She turned and walked away, leaving me standing there, the fountain pen still on the table beside my cold coffee. She left me more alone than I had ever been in my life, with the scent of lilies choking the very air I was trying to breathe. For a few weeks, I simply drifted. The sharp, agonizing edges of grief had softened into a dull, constant ache. I went to work, I wrote code, I ate when I remembered to. The world existed at a distance, behind a thick pane of glass. It was a casual email that shattered it. Mark, a friend from college who had handled my personal legal matters for years, sent a note just checking in. "Heard about your mom. I'm so sorry, Rory. Let me know if you need anything at all." On a whim, born from a tiny, persistent splinter of unease I couldn't ignore, I wrote back. I told him Serafina had me sign some company documents at the funeral. I asked him if that was normal. His reply was immediate. "Get me a copy of what you signed, now." The company's legal department sent the file over, and I forwarded it to Mark. I tried not to think about it, tried to push the unease away, but it lingered. An hour later, my phone rang. "Aurora." Mark's voice was stripped of all its usual warmth. It was flat, professional, the voice he used in a courtroom. "Are you sitting down?" I sat on the edge of my sofa. "This document," he began, and I could hear the rustle of paper, "is not a standard update. It's a transfer agreement. You signed over your entire stake in Etheria Dynamics, all of your founding shares, all of your voting rights, everything." The pane of glass between me and the world didn't just crack. It vaporized. The air rushed into my lungs, sharp and cold. "What are you talking about, Mark? That's not possible." "It is," he said, his voice grim. "According to Section 4B, the consideration for this transfer, the price she paid for your half of a multi-million-dollar company, was $1. $1. I hung up the phone. The grief I had been drowning in for weeks was instantly burned away by a white-hot, clarifying rage. It wasn't a loud, screaming anger. It was silent, deadly. Serafina hadn't just been cold or opportunistic. This was a plan. A long, carefully calculated betrayal that used our mother's death as the perfect cover. The memory of her standing there, the pen in her hand, her voice dripping with false sympathy about Mom's legacy, replayed in my mind, no longer a tragedy, but a crime scene. In that moment, something inside me shifted. The victim who had numbly signed her life away died, and someone else was born. I walked to my computer, my movements steady, purposeful. Serafina thought she had stolen our mother's legacy. She was wrong. She had only stolen the paperwork. The real legacy wasn't on paper. It was in my head, at my fingertips, and in the millions of lines of code only I truly understood. And I would use that legacy to build her a cage. Serafina spoke of legacy at the funeral as if it were a tangible heirloom, something you could simply inherit, like grandmother's silver tea service or a stock portfolio. Something that could be transferred with a fountain pen in the hushed, sterile quiet of a funeral home. She never understood. She couldn't, because legacy isn't paper, it isn't a logo, and it certainly isn't a title on a business card. Legacy is the grit under your fingernails that you can't scrub away. It's the chronic ache in your lower back from sitting in a cheap office chair for 20 hours straight. It's the phantom taste of sodium-rich, instant noodles that never quite leaves you, no matter how many Michelin star fancy dinners you can afford years later. Etheria Dynamics wasn't born in a glass-walled boardroom with a view of the skyline. It was born in my cramped second-floor apartment in a neighborhood the real estate agents generously called up and coming. The air there always smelled faintly of damp drywall and whatever my downstairs neighbor was boiling for dinner. For 2 years, my dining table wasn't used for meals. It was mission control buried under a chaotic tangle of black cables, half-empty coffee mugs growing their own ecosystems, and stack upon stack of technical manuals with dog-eared pages and broken spines. My life narrowed down to the glow of 3 monitors. I didn't measure my nights in hours of sleep. I measured them in bugs solved, lines of code compiled, and miracles performed on hardware that belonged in a museum. Serafina would call sometimes, her voice crackling over the phone from the back of a cab on her way to some networking mixer or investor cocktail hour. She'd ask for progress updates in that breezy tone, as if I were a factory she could just order to churn out widgets faster. She was out there polishing the surface. I was in the trenches, digging the foundation with my bare hands, running on caffeine and sheer stubborn will. I remember the exact moment I knew we hit a wall. The algorithm I was building, the very heart of what would become our proprietary technology, was becoming too complex, too powerful for my patched-together home system. It kept crashing, overheating my processors, until the apartment smelled like burning plastic. To make it work, to make Ethereum real, I needed enterprise-grade servers. I needed rack space in a secure data center. I needed real money, money we didn't have. Banks wouldn't talk to us without collateral, and we had nothing. Well, almost nothing. There was one thing of value I owned, not in the apartment, but parked on the street below, covered by a heavy canvas tarp. My dad's 1968 Ford Mustang. It was a beautiful, rumbling beast in Highland green. He had spent the last decade of his life restoring it, his knuckles permanently greased, his face lit up with a joy I rarely saw otherwise. When he passed, it became the last tangible piece of him I had. On bad days, I would just go sit in the driver's seat, close my eyes, and breathe in the scent of old leather, gasoline, and the faint ghost of his old spice. It felt like safety. For a solid week, I was paralyzed. The pragmatic engineer in my head battled the grieving daughter in my heart. Selling it felt like a betrayal. It felt like losing him all over again. But every time I ran the simulation on my computer and watched it fail, every time the screen went black, I knew what I had to do. I knew what he would have wanted me to do. He didn't raise me to worship things. He raised me to build a future. I listed it on a collector's site. A man with a kind, weather-beaten face and calloused hands came to look at it. He didn't haggle. He knew what it was worth. I watched him drive it away, the deep, throaty rumble of that V8 engine fading into the city traffic, taking a piece of my heart with it. I stood on the curb until silence returned, and I didn't let myself cry, not one tear. I took the cashier's check straight to the bank. The next day, I leased a tiny windowless cage in a data center downtown and bought our first real server rack. It felt like I had traded a piece of my father's soul for the company's heart. That server cage became my church, my school, and my home. While Serafina was selecting fonts for letterheads, I was teaching myself advanced network administration from textbooks I checked out of the public library. I learned military-grade encryption protocols from open-source university lectures at 4 a.m. I laid every single digital brick of the foundation she now stands on so proudly. I didn't do it for the money. I didn't do it for the recognition. I did it because I could see the beautiful, elegant machine we were building, and I knew with absolute certainty that I was the only person on Earth who could make it run. That was my legacy. It was a living, breathing thing, built not of paper and ink, but of sacrifice, sweat, code, and the ghost of a '68 Mustang. And no one, not even my own sister, was going to steal it from me. That past, the one built on sacrifice and sleepless nights, felt like a secret history now. A classified document only I could read. To the rest of the world, Ethereum Dynamics had only one architect, Serafina. I watched her on my monitor, the live stream of a tech conference keynote. She was in her element, pacing a polished stage under the warm glow of spotlights, a small microphone clipped to her lapel. She looked powerful, confident, every inch the visionary CEO. The camera flashes from the press pit glittered off her pearl earrings. "At Etheria," she said, her voice smooth and practiced, resonating with a passion that was expertly manufactured. "We aren't just building software. We are leveraging synergistic frameworks to cultivate a culture of disruptive innovation." I almost laughed. Synergistic frameworks. She wouldn't know a framework if it fell on her. While she was learning buzzwords, I was writing the foundational code that she was now taking credit for. "Our vision," she continued, gesturing to a massive screen behind her showing an elegant, abstract graphic, "is to empower our clients by creating a seamless, agile ecosystem." Agile. I remembered the night the primary database crashed, 2 weeks before our initial launch. I was on the phone with our one and only major client, a man whose patience was wearing thin, while simultaneously typing lines of code with my other hand, my heart pounding in my ears. I didn't sleep for 72 hours. That was agile. Not a word on a slide. The live stream ended, and I clicked the window closed. The silence of my office felt profound. An hour later, an expense report notification popped up. It was automatic, a copy sent to me as head of the tech division. I opened it out of habit. It was from Serafina. The vendor was a high-end boutique on Fifth Avenue. The item was listed simply as client entertainment. The amount was $10,450. Curiosity got the better of me. I did a quick search online. There it was on the boutique's front page, part of their new collection. A gleaming crimson leather handbag, $10,000 for a purse. My mind instantly went to the budget request I had submitted last week. A proposal for a critical server upgrade. The current system was running at 95% capacity. We were one major client away from a catastrophic system-wide failure. The cost of the upgrade was almost exactly $10,000. She had denied it, citing fiscal responsibility and the need to trim non-essential expenditures. I looked from the picture of the ridiculously expensive handbag back to the email denying my request. She hadn't just stolen my shares. She was actively starving the company's heart, the very technology I built, to feed her own vanity. She was selling a story of innovation and success to the world, a beautifully crafted, expensive lie. And she was using my truth, my work, to pay for it. But every transaction leaves a record. Every expense, every transfer, every denial. They were all just data points. And I was building a program that was very, very good at reading them. A fortress isn't built by one person alone. I knew the code, but I needed people who knew the truth. I called the meeting for 10 p.m. in the small, forgotten conference room at the end of the hall, the one with the flickering fluorescent light and the coffee machine that hadn't worked since 2018. It was the last place Serafina would ever look for anyone important. Leo arrived first. He'd been my first hire, a brilliant, grizzled engineer who saw code as poetry. He'd been with me in the server cage, had shared the cold pizza on late nights, and had seen the sale of the Mustang with his own eyes. He didn't need to be convinced. He sat down, his arms crossed over his chest, and got right to it. "They know Aurora," he said, his voice a low rumble. "The whole engineering team. They see the memos, they see her picture in the magazines, but they know who wrote the song. They're loyal to the architect, not the brand ambassador. You give the word, we walk. Every last one of us." His words were a balm on a wound I didn't even know was still bleeding. To be seen. To have my work recognized by the only people whose opinions truly mattered. It wasn't just about loyalty. It was a validation that my legacy was real, written in the very structure of the company. And they could read it, loud and clear. The door opened again, and Clara, our head of HR, slipped inside. She was sharp, empathetic, and had the weary look of someone who spent her days trying to put out the fires Serafina's ego started. She sat down, placing a thin file on the table. "It's getting worse," she said, her voice strained. She cut the continuing education budget for the junior engineers to pay for the lobby refresh. New marble, new abstract art. Morale is at an all-time low. We've lost 3 of our best people in the last 2 months to competitors. They all said the same thing in their exit interviews. The vision is gone. The company has lost its soul. She was confirming what I already knew. Serafina was a parasite, hollowing out the company from the inside, leaving behind a beautiful empty shell. I looked at them both, my 2 trusted allies. The engineer who knew the company's heart and the HR director who knew its soul. It was time to show them the teeth I had been sharpening in the dark. "She thinks she owns the company," I said, my voice quiet but clear. "She's wrong. She owns a collection of papers. The company, the actual living, breathing entity, is code. And that code answers to me." I turned my laptop around and pulled up a schematic on the screen. It was a complex, multi-layered diagram of our entire system architecture. But deep in the core, nested so elegantly that no outside audit would ever find it, was a new module. "I call it Project Chimera," I said. I pointed to the core. "For the last 3 months, I've been building a dead man's switch into our system. It's not a virus. It's more like a digital immune system. It's designed to recognize the system's true owner based on a complex set of biometric and cryptographic keys that only I possess. The moment it detected that my credentials had been permanently and hostilely revoked, it activated." Leo leaned forward, his eyes wide, tracing the lines on the screen. "My God, Aurora, is that a system-wide quarantine protocol?" "It is," I confirmed. "Right now, Chimera is silently and systematically isolating all critical functions. Financial transactions, client data access, administrative controls. It's wrapping them in layers of unbreakable encryption. She can sit in the CEO's chair, she can spend money on handbags, but she can no longer pilot the ship. She's a captain on a ship where the rudder, the engine, and the navigation have all just locked her out of the bridge. She just doesn't know it yet." Clara stared at the screen, then at me, a slow smile spreading across her face. "So she's a queen in a castle that's about to pull up the drawbridge and lock her in the tower." "Exactly," I said, "and we are the only ones with the key." The trap was set. The key was in my hand, but a small, stubborn part of me, the part that still remembered shared childhood holidays and whispered secrets after dark, hesitated. It felt like standing on the edge of a cliff, knowing the jump was necessary, but fearing the fall. Serafina, in her infinite arrogance, gave me the final push I needed. She called a mandatory all-hands meeting the following week. We all filed into the main atrium, the one she'd just spent a fortune renovating. The air smelled of new leather and expensive, abstract floral arrangements. She stood on a small, portable stage, beaming under the new track lighting, the picture of success. "Team," she began, her voice echoing slightly in the cavernous space. "I have some incredibly exciting news. As we look to the future, it's vital that our brand reflects the powerhouse we have become, which is why I am thrilled to announce Project Ascend." A slickly produced video played on the massive screen behind her, swooshing graphics, a soaring orchestral score, and a new, almost identical logo. "We are embarking on a complete corporate rebranding," she announced over the applause she'd queued up. "A new website, a new public image, and to celebrate this new chapter, we will be hosting an industry-defining launch gala at the Grand Imperial Ballroom in 2 weeks' time." A murmur went through the crowd. The Grand Imperial. That was a venue for IPO launches and political fundraisers. The cost would be astronomical. Serafina let the awe sink in before moving to the Q&A. A hand went up. It was David, one of my senior project managers. He looked nervous. "Serafina, that's great news, but, Aurora's team submitted an urgent request last month for a critical server infrastructure upgrade. We're currently redlining on capacity. Will funding for that be approved as part of this new budget?" The question hung in the air. Every single person on the engineering team knew what was at stake. Serafina's smile didn't falter, but it tightened at the edges. She gave a little condescending laugh. "David, thank you for your diligence, but we have to be strategic." Project Ascend is about our forward-facing image, about client acquisition and market confidence. Spending a massive sum on some back-end hardware that no client will ever see is simply not a prudent use of capital at this crucial juncture. That request is denied. She said it so casually, so dismissively. She had just announced a 6-figure party, and in the same breath refused to pay for the company's heart transplant. She called the engine of her entire empire some back-end hardware. In that moment, watching her stand there under the expensive lights, basking in her own profound ignorance, the last thread of hesitation inside me didn't just fray, it vaporized. The cliff I was standing on crumbled behind me. There was no going back. She wasn't just a thief, she was a fool who was going to drive the car my father's soul had paid for right off a cliff just to look good while she did it. Any lingering guilt, any whisper of sisterly duty was gone. It was replaced by a cold, righteous certainty. This wasn't just about getting back what was mine anymore. It was about saving the company from the person who was supposed to be leading it. The gala in 2 weeks, her grand celebration of herself, would not be her coronation. It would be her execution. The 2 weeks leading up to the gala were a study in parallel realities. On the surface, in the brightly lit, open-plan office space, there was a frantic, almost giddy energy. Caterers with clipboards bustled through the lobby. Graphic designers presented mock-ups of opulent invitations on large screens. And the scent of new paint and expensive floral arrangements filled the air. It was the energy of a coronation, a grand festival, orchestrated by and for Serafina. She thrived in it, gliding through the chaos, radiant and commanding, completely oblivious to the silent, methodical reality unfolding right under her nose, in the digital heart of the company she thought she owned. My grief was a distant memory, my anger a cooled and hardened blade. I had a singular, clarifying purpose. My days became a meticulous performance. I was the dutiful, head-down CTO, the quiet, socially awkward sister who was good with computers. I attended Serafina's endless rebranding meetings, nodding at her vapid, buzzword-laden slogans. "We're not just a company, we're a conversation," she'd say, and I'd nod. I answered her technical questions with the simplest possible analogies, watching the information slide right off her polished, impenetrable veneer. But my nights, my precious silent nights, were for me. The first step was to build an ark. For 3 consecutive nights, after the last employee had gone home, I drove to the data center. Not the small, cramped cage I had started in, but a sprawling, state-of-the-art facility on the outskirts of the city. The moment I passed through the security airlock, I was hit by an Arctic blast of air conditioning, a constant, deafening hum of thousands of fans, and the faint, clean scent of ozone. It was a cathedral of information, and I was its only true parishioner. Under the guise of running routine integrity checks, a task Serafina wouldn't understand, let alone question, I began a meticulous, targeted backup. This wasn't a simple drag-and-drop copy of our current database. This was an archaeological dig. I delved deep into the server archives, pulling the earliest source code commit logs. There they were, my digital fingerprints, time-stamped at 4:17 a.m. on a Tuesday 6 years ago, with the note, initial framework commit, let's see if this thing flies. I found the chat logs between myself and Leo from the week the primary database crashed, just before our first major client demo. It was a frantic, sleep-deprived string of technical shorthand, a digital conversation that captured pure, unadulterated panic and the eventual triumph of a shared struggle. It's not responding, Rory. I think the index is corrupted beyond repair. My reply? Give me an hour. I can rebuild it from the transaction logs. Just keep the client on the phone. Stall. We saved the company that night with nothing but caffeine and code. I archived the original business plan I had written in my apartment, the one with the faint ring of a coffee stain on the cover page. It detailed a vision of slow, sustainable growth, of reinvesting profits into R&D, of building a culture of engineering excellence. It was a world away from Serafina's plan of dazzling the world with marble lobbies and celebrity-catered parties. I saved everything that proved where we came from, every digital brick, every bead of sweat. I encrypted it all, wrapping it in layers of code so thick it would take a government agency a decade to crack, and transferred the massive files to a series of hardened offline solid-state drives. I held them in my hand, each one no bigger than a credit card, but they felt as heavy as stone tablets. It was more than data. It was the company's true history, its soul. It was the unimpeachable evidence I would need to prove that what I was about to do wasn't sabotage, but a restoration. The next night, sitting in the quiet of my apartment, I composed the most important email of my life. The recipient was Mr. Alistair Vance, our primary investor. He wasn't just a venture capitalist, he was old-school industry. A man who had started with a single machine shop and built an empire. He valued calloused hands over manicured nails and common sense over corporate jargon. Most importantly, he had been my father's friend. My appeal to him couldn't be purely emotional. It had to be a closing argument, rooted in fact and the shared values of a generation that believed you build things to last. Dear Mr. Vance, I began, the words appearing on the screen. I hope this email finds you well. I am writing to you today, not merely as the CTO of Etheria Dynamics, but as Robert's daughter. I know how much you valued my father's judgment, and I find myself in a position where I must request a small measure of the trust you placed in him. I spent an hour crafting the next paragraphs, laying out the situation with the cold, brutal clarity of an engineering schematic. I attached a side-by-side comparison of my original, modest growth plan versus Serafina's current, astronomical burn rate. I detailed her denial of the critical server upgrade, explaining the catastrophic risk it posed to the very platform his investment was built upon. I contrasted the $10,000 upgrade denial directly with the expense report for the Project Ascend Gala, which was approaching $250,000. I wrote about her pattern of hiring expensive, brand strategy consultants, while simultaneously freezing the salaries of the senior engineers who were the company's lifeblood. Then came the final, devastating attachment. I had paid a private digital forensics service to pull the security camera footage from the funeral home. The click of the mouse as I attached the MP4 file felt like loading a bullet into a chamber. "Alistair," I wrote, my tone shifting for a single, crucial moment of personal appeal. The attached video file shows the exact moment the transfer of ownership was signed. It is silent and grainy, but I ask that you watch it. You will see my sister looking at her watch. You will see me, barely able to stand. My mother had been gone for less than 2 hours. Serafina told me Mom would have wanted us to protect the company. I now believe that what I am about to do is the only way to truly honor that sentiment. I have taken the liberty of scheduling an emergency board meeting for 9 a.m. the morning after the gala. I have a solution to propose that will secure the future of this company and your investment in it. I only ask that you review this evidence and come to that meeting with an open mind. I believe you will see that I am not acting out of malice, but out of a desperate need to protect our shared legacy. Sincerely, Aurora. I saved the email as a draft. It sat there, a digital bomb, waiting for me to press the button. The night before the gala, I called my final war council. The 3 of us met again in the forgotten conference room. The air was thick with a tense, electric energy. I kept it brief and direct, a pre-flight check before a mission with no possibility of turning back. "Tomorrow is the day," I said, my voice steady. "The gala starts at 7. Serafina is scheduled to give her keynote address at 9 o'clock sharp. That's our window." I looked at Leo. Chimera's quarantine protocol will be fully engaged by 8:45. At 9:01, just as she's taking her bow, I will trigger the final lockdown from a custom app on my phone. It will be instantaneous. All external data ports will be sealed. The internal network will freeze. Every screen in that ballroom running our software will go black. No one will be able to log in, log out, or access a single byte of data. Your job, Leo, is to be at the data center. There will be alarms, loud ones. Your credentials will be the only ones that still work. You are my eyes and ears on the physical hardware. I need you to ensure there is no outside interference and to be ready to initiate a full system reboot on my command and my command alone. Leo gave a single firm nod, his face set like stone. "I'll be there. They won't get past me." I turned to Clara. "Your role is just as critical. When the system freezes, panic is going to rip through this company. Our employees will be terrified. Your team will be the front line. I have a prepared statement that will be pushed to your phone the moment it happens. Your job is to manage the message. Reassure our people. Tell them leadership is aware of a critical security breach and is handling it. Instruct them to go home and await further communication. Prevent chaos at all costs. You are the voice of calm in the storm." Clara's expression was grim but determined. "I understand. I'll have my team ready to field the calls. We'll hold the line." "Good," I said. "This only works if we are calm, professional, and in complete control. We are not saboteurs. We are restorers." We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of our conspiracy settling over us. It was Leo who broke it. "She's going to be on that stage," he said, a note of grim satisfaction in his voice. "In front of everyone. Investors, journalists, competitors. When it happens." "Yes," I said, a cold certainty in my own voice. "She is." That night, sleep was an impossibility. I sat in my office, the city lights a silent, glittering audience outside my window. On my main monitor, I had the code for Project Chimera open. It scrolled past thousands upon thousands of lines of logic, elegant and ruthless. It wasn't a weapon of destruction, it was a surgeon's scalpel, designed for a single, precise incision to remove a cancer that was killing the host from within. On a smaller monitor, I had a picture open. It was of me and Serafina, aged about 10 and 12. We were at the beach, our arms slung around each other's shoulders, squinting into the sun, our faces alight with identical, gap-toothed grins. I remembered that day. Our dad had just taught us how to skip stones, and we'd spent the whole afternoon in a fierce competition. I remembered the warmth of the sun on my skin and the easy, uncomplicated love I had for the girl standing next to me. For a long moment, I felt a pang of a deep, ancient sorrow for the girl in that photo, for the sister I had loved and lost long before our mother died. Then, with a deliberate click of the mouse, I closed the image. That girl was gone. That sister was a stranger. The person she had become saw family as a liability and legacy as a commodity. She had chosen her path, and tomorrow night she would finally be forced to face the consequences of it. I turned back to the screen, my resolve as hard and clear as glass. The night was almost over. The dawn was coming. I was in my office at 7:45 a.m., not working, just waiting. The sun was just beginning to cut through the morning haze, casting long, sharp shadows across the city. The office was silent, a hollow, pristine temple to my sister's ambition. I could smell the newness of it all, the faint chemical scent of the carpets, the expensive leather of the chairs in the lobby, the abstract, sterile floral arrangements that were replaced twice a week. It smelled like money being burned, a funeral pyre for the company we were supposed to build together. The glass doors of the elevator slid open with a soft, expensive sigh that seemed to echo in the emptiness. And there she was. Serafina didn't just walk into the lobby. She made an entrance, a performance for an audience of no one. She was wearing a cream-colored power suit that was so perfectly tailored it looked like it had been sculpted onto her body. Her heels clicked with sharp, rhythmic authority on the new marble floor, a sound that was both commanding and completely out of place in the morning quiet. She handed her briefcase to the receptionist without a word, not even a glance, a queen bestowing an object upon a servant. Her eyes were already scanning the space, her space, before she glided toward the main office area. She saw me sitting at my desk through the glass wall of my office. A wide, brilliant smile spread across her face, the kind she used for magazine covers, all teeth and no warmth. She strode over, her presence filling the quiet air, trailing a faint, expensive cloud of perfume. "Morning, Rory," she said, her voice bright and condescendingly cheerful. She leaned against my doorframe, one hand on her hip, a picture of casual, unassailable power. "Big day today, huh? Feeling the excitement?" I didn't answer. I just looked at her, my face a carefully constructed mask of neutrality. I kept my breathing even, my hands resting calmly on my desk. My heart was a slow, steady drum in my chest, calm, ready. My silence, my stillness, didn't seem to bother her. She saw it as submission, the quiet, impotent resentment of the vanquished. She gave a little laugh, a sound like ice cubes clinking in a crystal glass. "Listen," she said, her tone shifting to one of feigned magnanimity, as if bestowing a great gift. "I'm sure you've had some time to process everything since the all-hands meeting. No hard feelings, I hope. At the end of the day, it's just business." It's just business, the most Serafina thing she could possibly say. an attempt to reduce years of shared history, of my sacrifice and her calculated betrayal, to a meaningless corporate cliché. She was giving me a chance to bend the knee, to accept my diminished place in her new world order. I remained silent. I watched a tiny, almost imperceptible muscle twitch at the corner of her eye. My placidity was getting under her skin. She had expected anger, tears, arguments. She didn't know how to handle this unnerving calm. It was a variable she hadn't accounted for. Anyway, she said, pushing off the doorframe, her patience finally wearing thin. I need to go over the keynote speech one last time. My office, now. She didn't wait for a reply. She turned, her sharp heels clicking away toward the corner office, the CEO's office, the one with the panoramic view that used to be our mother's, the one where Mom had always kept a photo of the two of us on the beach, the one she now called hers. I took a slow, deep breath, my fingers resting lightly on my mouse. I watched her walk away, a conqueror surveying her domain. She thought this was her victory march. She had no idea she was walking to her own execution. I stood up, my movements deliberate, feeling the solid floor beneath my feet. The lake was perfectly still. The storm was about to break. I followed her, my steps silent on the thick, sound-dampening carpet. The walk to the corner office felt like 100 miles. It was a path I'd walked 1,000 times when it was our mother's office, filled with warm wood, overflowing bookshelves, and the faint scent of her favorite tea. Serafina had stripped it bare. Now it was a minimalist cathedral of glass and chrome, cold and impersonal, a showroom for a person who didn't actually exist. She reached the door and, without breaking stride, held her security card up to the small black panel on the wall. It was a gesture she'd performed 1,000 times, one of casual, entitled ownership. Nothing happened. A small red light blinked once, then went dark. The lock didn't click. The door remained shut. She tried again, this time pressing the card firmly against the panel. Again, the single insolent red blink. Useless, she muttered, a flash of annoyance crossing her face. It can't seem to keep anything running in this place. She looked over her shoulder at me, her expression a mixture of impatience and command. Is the network down again? Fix it. I said nothing. I walked past her, pulled my own card from my pocket, and held it up to the panel. A soft, cheerful beep sounded, and the light flashed green. With a heavy, satisfying thunk, the magnetic lock disengaged. I pushed the door open and held it for her, my face a blank mask. The act of courtesy was a quiet, profound assertion of power. Her eyes narrowed, confusion warring with her ingrained arrogance. She swept past me into the office without a word. She dropped her portfolio onto the massive glass desk and sank into the white leather throne that had replaced our mother's comfortable, worn chair. With an irritated sigh, she tapped the spacebar on her keyboard, waking the widescreen monitor. She began to type her password, her fingers hitting the keys with sharp, angry little taps. She hit enter. The screen flashed, access denied. She stared at it for a second, then let out an exasperated breath. For God's sake. She typed it again, this time more slowly, deliberately. Access denied. Now, a real flicker of unease crossed her face. Her annoyance was curdling into something that looked almost like fear. She grabbed her phone from her purse, her thumb swiping angrily at the screen. I don't have any emails, she said, her voice a little too loud in the quiet room. My whole account is offline. She looked up at me then. The CEO mask was gone. In its place was the face of the older sister from our childhood, who had just realized she was no longer in charge of the game. What did you do? The question was a low, dangerous hiss. I let the door swing shut behind me. The heavy latch clicked into place, sealing us inside her beautiful, useless cage. I walked slowly toward the desk, my footsteps silent on her expensive rug. "The system is working perfectly, Serafina," I said, my voice calm and even. It was the voice of a scientist stating an objective fact. It's doing exactly what it was designed to do. I stopped on the other side of the desk, looking down at her. For the first time in my life, I felt taller. "That piece of paper you had me sign at Mom's funeral," I continued, my voice losing none of its cold precision, "gave you ownership of the shares. It gave you the title, the office, the illusion of control. But shares don't run this company. The code does." I let that sink in, watching the dawning horror in her eyes as the pieces began to click into place. "My code," I said, the words as solid and real as the foundation of the building. "And I am the only one with the key." For a long moment, she just stared at me, her mind clearly racing, trying to find an angle, a way to twist my words into a lie she could manage. "That's a bluff," she finally said, but the words had no force. Her voice was thin, a pale imitation of its usual authority. "You're a coder, Aurora. You don't have the nerve." "Don't I?" I asked, my voice still quiet. Before she could answer, a shrill, piercing sound cut through the tense silence of the office. Her phone, lying on the glass desk, was ringing. The screen lit up, illuminating the name that made the blood drain from her face. Alistair Vance. Her composure snapped back into place instantly. A lifetime of practice in maintaining a flawless facade. She smoothed the front of her jacket, took a deep breath, and answered, her voice once again the smooth, confident purr of a CEO. "Alistair, what a pleasant surprise," she chirped. I watched her, a silent observer at my own play. I saw the way her knuckles whitened as she gripped the phone. No, everything is perfectly fine here," she said, forcing a light laugh. "Just a little system glitch this morning. Aurora is fixing it as we speak." She shot me a look of pure venom, a silent command to play along. I didn't move, I didn't even blink. Her face changed, the confident smile froze, then melted away. I'm sorry, what email?" There was a long pause. She sank back into the white leather chair, all the rigid strength gone from her spine. I could hear the faint, tinny sound of Mr. Vance's voice from the phone's earpiece, calm and implacable. "The entire board?" Serafina whispered, her voice cracking. You're on your way up now?" She didn't say goodbye. The phone slipped from her fingers, clattering onto the glass desk. The line went dead. She looked at me, her eyes wide with a terror that was pure and absolute. The private, two-person drama she thought she could control had just been breached. The audience was arriving. "The email I sent Mr. Vance last night," I explained, my voice devoid of any triumph, stating it as a simple fact. It included the security footage from Mom's funeral. The last of her carefully constructed world shattered. Her private battle had just become a public trial. And the jury was walking down the hall. A knock on the door, firm and decisive, broke the spell. It was Mr. Vance's executive assistant. "They're ready for you in the main boardroom." Serafina visibly composed herself, pulling on her mask of authority like a suit of armor. She stood, smoothed her jacket, and walked toward the door, expecting me to follow, like a chastened subordinate. I didn't. I let her walk out alone. I gave her a 10-second head start before I followed, carrying nothing but my laptop. The main boardroom was at the opposite end of the floor, a vast, intimidating space designed to make visitors feel small. A single massive slab of polished mahogany stretched the length of the room, surrounded by 20 high-backed leather chairs. One entire wall was glass, offering a stunning panoramic view of the city below. It was a stage for power, and today it was my courtroom. The board members were already seated, a collection of grim-faced men and one woman in expensive conservative suits. They murmured to each other in low tones, their briefcases open, their expressions a mixture of confusion and irritation. Serafina had taken the seat at the head of the table, the one that was rightfully the CEO's. She tried to smile at them, to engage in the usual pre-meeting pleasantries, but her voice was tight, her charm utterly failing her. Mr. Vance entered last. He was a tall man in his late 70s, with a full head of silver hair and eyes that had seen everything. He wore a simple, perfectly tailored gray suit, and his presence immediately silenced the room. He didn't look at Serafina. His gaze fell on me, his expression unreadable, and he gave a single, almost imperceptible nod before taking his seat to the right of the CEO's chair. I didn't take my designated seat along the side. I walked calmly to the head of the table, placed my laptop next to Serafina's, and connected it to the room's projector. The simple act of plugging in a cable was a declaration of intent. The massive screen on the wall, which had been displaying the Etheria Dynamics logo, flickered and then showed my desktop. Serafina started to speak. As I was saying, there seems to be a minor internal... I cut her off. Not by speaking, but by opening the first file. On the screen, a high-resolution scan of a legal document appeared. The transfer agreement. I didn't say a word. I used the mouse to slowly zoom in on Section 4B, the text swelling to fill the screen. In consideration for the sum of $1, $1 US. A low collective inhale went through the room. I let the words hang in the air for a full 10 seconds, the absurdity of them echoing in the silent, opulent room. Then I scrolled down to the signature page. I zoomed in again, first on my own name, a jagged, broken scrawl that looked nothing like my usual firm signature. Then I moved the view to the top of the page, to the date line, stark and undeniable in black and white. Only then did I speak. My voice was calm, clear, and devoid of emotion, like an engineer presenting a technical analysis. On this date, I said, my words precise, our mother, Eleanor Vance's lifelong friend and your former business partner, was laid to rest. Her funeral service was held at 2:00 in the afternoon. I moved the mouse pointer to hover just below my signature. At approximately 4:30 p.m., in the reception hall of the funeral home, I was presented with this document. I was told it was a standard update to ensure the stability of the company. I was told it was what my mother would have wanted. I zoomed out, showing the full document once more. I turned from the screen to face the board. I didn't look at Serafina. I looked at each of them, one by one, letting them see the quiet certainty in my eyes. That is how my sister became the sole voting shareholder of Etheria Dynamics. The room was utterly silent. The board members shifted in their seats, avoiding each other's eyes, their faces a mixture of shock and dawning comprehension. Serafina sat ramrod straight, her face a pale, chalky mask, her hands clenched into white-knuckled fists in her lap. But I wasn't looking at her. I was looking at Alistair Vance. He hadn't moved a muscle. He was staring at the date on the screen, his jaw set like granite, his expression one of profound, cold disappointment. The jury had heard the evidence. The trial had begun. A tense, suffocating silence filled the boardroom. Serafina, recovering her footing, tried to seize control. "This is a private family matter," she said, her voice tight with forced composure. She looked around the table, trying to rally support. "And a gross mischaracterization of a standard business agreement. Aurora is clearly emotional." I clicked the remote. The screen behind me went black. The sudden absence of light and data was a physical shock in the sterile room. All eyes snapped from the screen to me. The corporate theater was over. The personal reckoning had begun. I turned away from the table and looked directly at Serafina. My voice, when I spoke, was lower, stripped of its clinical precision. For the first time, a slight, tightly controlled tremor entered my words, the sound of a pain so deep it could no longer be entirely suppressed. "I want you to remember that day, Serafina. Not the documents, the day." I took a step closer. "I want you to remember the feel of the air in that room, the smell of the lilies. I remember my hands were so cold. They were cold because I had just come from the viewing room, from touching Mom's hand for the last time. I saw a flicker of something in her eyes, a brief, hunted look before the walls went back up. I didn't let her escape. And you came to me, not with a hug, not with a shared memory. You came with a portfolio and a pen, and you said to me," my voice dropped to a near whisper, forcing everyone in the room to lean in, "Mom would have wanted us to take care of this quickly." I let her own words hang in the air between us, a poisonous vapor. Then I turned my gaze to the man at the head of the table, to Alistair Vance. "Mr. Daur Vance," I said, my voice rising slightly, filled with the force of a truth I had held back for months. "You knew my mother. You knew my father. You know what they valued. They taught us that your name was the only thing you truly owned. That family was a fortress, not a hunting ground. That you honor the dead with your actions, not just your words." I pointed a single trembling finger at my sister. She used our mother's memory as a tool. She stood in a room filled with our family's grief and used the echo of our mother's voice, the woman who taught us everything about decency and hard work, to strip her own sister of her life's work. She took the most sacred moment of our lives and turned it into a cold, predatory business transaction. I took a breath, my chest aching with the effort of keeping my composure. "That isn't business, Mr. Vance. That isn't a private family matter. That is a desecration. That is a betrayal of everything our parents stood for. It's not just fraud. It's an act of profound, calculated disloyalty. It is an act of profound disrespect to the memory of the woman you called your friend." The room was utterly still. No one breathed. Serafina's face had crumpled. The mask was gone, shattered, leaving behind a pale, terrified woman, stripped bare in front of the very people she had worked so hard to impress. But I wasn't looking at her. I was looking at Alistair Vance. He hadn't taken his eyes off me. A look of deep, profound pain had settled over his features. He slowly closed his eyes as if shutting out a sight he could no longer bear. It was not the look of an angry investor. It was the look of a heartbroken father. In that moment, I knew. The verdict was in. Mr. Vance opened his eyes. The silence in the room was so profound, it felt like a physical weight. He slowly, deliberately, turned his head and looked at Serafina. When he spoke, his voice was not angry. It was something far worse. It was heavy with the weariness of a deep and profound disappointment. "Your father, Robert, was a man of his word," he said, his voice quiet, but carrying to every corner of the room. "Your mother, Eleanor, was the kindest, most decent woman I have ever known. They would be ashamed, not of failure, never of failure. They would be heartbroken by this dishonor. He didn't need to raise his voice. The simple, awful truth of his words was enough. He had passed judgment not on a CEO, but on a daughter. It was a verdict from which there was no appeal. Then he turned to me. The hardness in his eyes softened, replaced by a look of weary respect. "Aurora," he said, his voice now firm, decisive. "You said you had a solution. The board is listening." The transfer of power was absolute. It was done. I picked up the remote and clicked it once. The screen behind me came to life again. It did not show the old contract. It showed a new one, already drafted. It was a corporate restructuring proposal, one that reinstated my founding shares, established a new board oversight committee, and reallocated a significant portion of the executive budget directly to research and development. It was fair, it was just, and it was ironclad. "This," I said, my voice steady and clear, "is how we protect the company. This is how we honor their legacy." Mr. Vance looked at the screen, then around the table at the silent, stunned board members. He gave a single authoritative nod. "I trust the judgment of the company's architect," he announced. "All in favor." One by one, hands went up around the table. The reign was over. The restoration had begun. There was no shouting, no dramatic walkout. The end of Serafina's reign was as quiet and sterile as the boardroom it happened in. The board members filed out, avoiding her eyes, murmuring polite, non-committal phrases as they passed. Mr. Vance was the last to leave. He paused by the door and looked at her, his face etched with a sorrow that was far more damning than anger. "The lawyers will be in touch," he said, and then he was gone. The immediate consequence was her removal as CEO, effective instantly. She was allowed to retain a non-executive seat on the board, a title with no power, a leash to ensure her cooperation while the financial mess was untangled. It was a gilded cage, a constant public reminder of her fall from grace. A forensic accounting team, authorized by Mr. Vance, descended the next day. They were quiet, polite, and utterly ruthless. They unraveled Serafina's expense reports with surgical precision. The $10,000 handbag, listed as client entertainment, was the first to be flagged. Then came the $250,000 gala, the contracts for which were immediately canceled, incurring massive penalties. The new marble in the lobby, the abstract art, the first-class flights for branding research, it all added up. She was not charged with a crime. Mr. Vance, for the sake of the family name and the company's stability, ensured it was handled internally. But the punishment was, perhaps, more fitting. She was ordered to repay every single dollar of misused company funds. I saw the for sale sign go up on her gleaming downtown penthouse a week later. The flashy sports car she drove, the one she'd bought with her first big bonus, disappeared from its reserved spot in the company garage. She was forced to liquidate her perfect life, piece by piece, to pay for the lies that had built it. But the true punishment, the one that truly broke her, was not financial. It was the loss of the one thing she valued above all else, her image. I saw her a few weeks after the meeting. She was in her old office, packing her personal effects into a small cardboard box. She was no longer wearing a power suit, but a simple, nondescript sweater. Her hair was pulled back, in a simple ponytail. She looked smaller, diminished. As people walked past the open door, they wouldn't look in. They would suddenly find something fascinating on their phones, or become deeply engrossed in a conversation with the person next to them. It wasn't overt hostility. It was worse. It was a quiet, collective shunning. She had become irrelevant. an embarrassing memory. Mr. Vance would nod to her politely in the hall, a gesture of cold, professional courtesy that was a universe away from the warm, fatherly affection he used to show her. He had not forgiven her, and it was clear he never would. He had withdrawn his respect, and in the world she had tried to conquer, that was a fate worse than bankruptcy. She had lost her audience. The applause had stopped, and she was left alone on an empty stage, with nothing but the echo of her own ambition. 6 months passed. The seasons changed outside the tall glass windows, and inside, the company changed with them. The cold, sterile silence of Serafina's reign was replaced by a low, productive hum. The scent of fear was gone, replaced by the smell of coffee and the whiteboards in the conference rooms, which were once again covered in complex equations and chaotic, brilliant diagrams. The title on my office door now read Chief Executive Officer, but I spent very little time there. The vast, minimalist space Serafina had created felt like a museum, and I had no interest in being an exhibit. I had the chrome and glass furniture removed, replacing it with the comfortable, worn wooden desk from our mother's old study and 2 overstuffed armchairs. Most days, however, my real office was in the engineering pit, a laptop balanced on a stack of manuals, or down in the cool, humming sanctuary of the data center with Leo. That's where I was one Tuesday afternoon, my sleeves rolled up, looking at a diagnostic screen with him. The server upgrade, the first capital expenditure I approved as CEO, was running flawlessly. Our capacity had doubled, and the system was faster and more stable than it had ever been. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" Leo said, not looking at me, but at the steady, rhythmic blinking of the server lights. "A well-oiled machine." "It is," I agreed. We weren't just talking about the hardware. Later that week, I sat down with Clara and Mr. Vance in my office. I pushed a file across the desk to them. "What's this?" Mr. Vance asked, adjusting his glasses. "It's the charter for the Eleanor Vance Scholarship Fund," I said. "I've allocated an initial 5% of last quarter's profits to endow it. It will provide full tuition and mentorship for young women from low-income backgrounds pursuing degrees in computer science and engineering." Clara read the document, and her eyes grew misty. "Aurora, this is wonderful." Mr. Vance was silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on my mother's name on the paper. "Your mother always said the best investment you can make is in a person's potential," he said, his voice thick with emotion. This is a real legacy, Aurora, a living one." After they left, I stood by the window, looking out at the city. The victory hadn't been a sudden, exhilarating explosion. It was a slow, quiet dawn. It was the freedom to work alongside people I respected, to build something of substance, something that would last. It was the peace that came from knowing the company was finally healthy, growing steadily on a foundation of innovation and mutual respect, not on a scaffolding of lies and expensive branding. I no longer thought about revenge. The anger had been a fuel, a necessary catalyst that had burned away, leaving behind something clean and strong. I felt a sense of rightness, of balance restored. I was not my sister's keeper, nor was I her victim. I was simply the architect, back in my workshop, surrounded by the tools of my trade, with a clear blueprint for the future. And for the first time in a very long time, I was happy. I was working late one night, not out of necessity, but out of love for the work itself. The office was quiet, the only sound the soft click of my keyboard and the hum of the city far below. On the corner of my desk, propped against a stack of books, was the old photograph of me and Serafina on the beach, our arms around each other, smiling at a future that had not yet been written. I could look at it now without the sharp sting of betrayal. It was just a picture of two little girls, a relic from a different lifetime. A soft knock on my open door made me look up. Serafina stood there, hesitating on the threshold. She was dressed simply, in jeans and a dark sweater, a stark contrast to the armor she used to wear. She looked tired, and for the first time in years, she looked her age. "Can I talk to you for a minute?" she asked, her voice quiet, uncertain. I nodded toward one of the armchairs. She came in and sat on the edge of the seat, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She looked around the office, at our mother's old desk, at the familiar, comfortable space I had recreated. "I'm sorry, Aurora," she said, her voice barely a whisper. The words sounded foreign, difficult for her to form. For what I did, not just the business, the papers. What I did that day at the funeral, it was wrong, it was cruel. And I'm sorry. The apology was simple, unadorned with excuses. It was the truest thing I had heard her say in a decade. I looked from her face to the photograph of the two smiling girls. "I know," I said. "I didn't say, 'I forgive you.' The words weren't mine to give, not yet." "Trust takes time to rebuild, Serafina." She nodded, accepting it. It was more than she had expected, and all she deserved. She stood, gave me one last long look, and then left as quietly as she had come. I turned back to my monitor, to the screen filled with cascading lines of text. The code was alive, a living, breathing system of logic and order. My mother's legacy, I realized, wasn't in the company name on the door or the value of its stock. It was in the resilience she had instilled in me, the strength to withstand the storm. And my legacy, it wasn't written in ink on a fraudulent contract. It was written here, in a language of my own making, millions of lines of code, each one a testament to a simple, unshakable truth, that a foundation built on hard work and integrity will always be stronger than a facade built on lies. It was a legacy that protected itself, a legacy that would endure